I'm coming for you, Dad.
Level up, 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 level up. Ooh, the princess, she love me.
What's up, guys? It's the Kingpin Games, and today I'm going to be talking about the top 5 Final Fantasy X bosses. And you might be thinking, hey, why not top 5 Final Fantasy bosses or something like that? Well, to be honest, I don't really like the other Final Fantasies, and I get to do what I want, and I like that. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to be basing this off of a total of a score, and the score is going to be based off of 3 things: the fight, the story, and the difficulty. And so by fight, I mean how creative the fight was. You know, is it like an ordinary fight, or did you have to do something special to defeat him? Number 2, talking about the story, like the story surrounding the fight. What happened to lead up to this? You know, how important is this to the actual story? And number 3, is difficulty. And I mean by difficulty meaning your first time playing, or how good your strategy had to be to fight. You know, not your 20th time playing when you have over level characters and you're used to the game. And so without further ado, I will bring you boss 1 and boss 2. No, not really. I'm gonna bring you boss 5. So let's get right into it.
So, we're to be pushed off a cliff.
So number 5, we got the Chocobo Eater, and you might be a little surprised that this got on the list considering how early this boss is. You know, it's about maybe 28% into the game or something like that. The score I gave it is a 10, 5, 3, 2, and the reason is because this fight was very creative. There's not another fight like this where you have to push something off the cliff, which is really unique, and I always enjoyed this fight. I usually start from Mihin just so that I can make sure when I replay the game to get the Blitzball game and this fight in, because it's really cool. And I remember struggling with this, but the difficulty isn't that bad, you know, and the story doesn't really matter. I was going to give the story a 2 out of 5 instead of 3, but the fact that Jack and them fought it first made me add a point to it. So yeah, so let's go into number 4.
Maester Seymour! So be it.
Of course this guy made the list. Did you think he wasn't going to make the list? I mean, come on. And I was tempted to put the 3rd version of him, but the story from the 3rd version doesn't match the first time you verse him. You know, the 3rd version is really difficult too, and it catches you a lot, but by that point you're used to seeing Seymour and you kind of expect him to show up at random times. He's like the shredder. But anyways, in this fight, I gave this a score of 11, 3, 5, 3, and here's why. Okay, so the fight, it's not too difficult, but it is kind of creative as far as having to, you know, deal with so many elements being blasted at you, because before now mostly you've been dealing with physical attacks from bosses, and so this time you have to be really strategic about how you deal with them, and you don't really, especially on your first time, because for some reason nobody pays attention to the fact that if you have a sensor, it tells you his pattern, but nobody cares. And so we don't know the pattern, and we try to fight him, and he starts doing multi attacks, and then he pulls out Anima. So you know what, let's bring the difficulty up to a 4, because Anima was crazy. He had like 10,000 HP, and when you're under leveled, it is so difficult to deal with that. I might even bring this to a 5. I'm gonna say 4.5 on difficulty. So the score is now 12.5, because this fight, now that I think about it, was pretty crazy. So hand it to Seymour, and you might as well just lump the 3rd version in with them too. I didn't want to put 2 Seymours on the list, so they, you know, it's okay. Anyways, let's get on to the next one.
You're late, Auron. I know.
Now, number 3 being Jack. Now, this was a hard decision, but in my opinion, they kind of nailed this as a final fight. I don't really count the Aeon's part or Yu Yevon, but as a final fight versus Jack, I think they really nailed it, you know. I gave this a score of 12. And the reason for that is because the fight's not that difficult. He does have these things healing him, but your damage by this point, it shouldn't make you take too long. Now he does have some attacks that'll kill your whole team, but it's kind of hard to really lose to Jack at the point you're at, because Sin levels you up so much, plus you already went to the Omega ruins and everything, so it's kind of hard to say that this fight would be difficult. Like even my first time, all I did was pull out Anima and pull out my other Aeon and did 2 overdrives to beat him, so it's not really difficult. But the story now, what I love about the story in this, it's not the fact that Titus was waiting all this time to finally beat Jack. It's what happens after the fight. Okay, so through the whole story, Titus goes through talking about how much he hates his dad, and then we find out really it's mostly because of his mom why he hates his dad. And then after the fight, Titus goes the whole game never ever shedding a single tear, not one. He never shed a tear. As much as Jack called him a crybaby, Orin called him a crybaby, and the Faith called him a crybaby, he never cried. He whined a little bit. And after this fight, when his father was struck down and he had to look at him, he actually cried. So I might give the story a 6 out of 10. 6 out of 5 because of that. Because honestly, that's one of the best moments in the game. One of my favorite moments. And the difficulty was a 4. Like I said, it wasn't too difficult, but being underleveled in this fight is a really big deal. So I get it. Anyways, moving on to number 2.
We gotta pay? If we lose, you'll die too, buddy.
I have faith in your victory.
Gee, thanks.
So number 2, of course, and it was really close. I really almost put this number 1. Like, this is how serious this fight is. So I gave this a score of a 14, and the reason for that is because the fight is creative, but I mean, you're just fighting on an airship, and so I gave it a 4 because it's not like crazy type of fight where I can't even explain that. It'll make sense in the next fight. The story was great. What happens around this is that Yuno was stolen and you had to go and get her, and it was an all or nothing fight to go get her. If you beat Avery and lost to the guards that was at Bevel, which can happen because of the thrust kick, you had to start all over. And so I remember I finally beat Avery and get to Bevel and got thrust kicked 3 times and had to start all over. And it took 100 tries to finally beat Avery, but once you got him, you got him. But the first time, this is probably the most difficult boss in the game, and if not, it'd be a very close number 2, because I cannot tell you how many tries it took to actually beat this thing. And I would say this is more difficult than what I had for number 1, because this boss didn't take me as many times as the next. So yeah, to me, this is probably the greatest fight. If I wasn't basing it off this, I'd say this is probably the greatest fight in the history of Final Fantasy. And I did play all of them except the newer ones, but I can tell you that right now, this is the greatest fight I've ever fought. So moving on, the big guy, number 1. Number 1, and I know you knew that I knew that you knew that I knew that you knew that you knew that I knew Yunalesca was going to make the list. There's not anyone on the planet who can do a playthrough of Final Fantasy and not die to Yunalesca. I just tried and I still died. Doesn't matter what you do, it's going to happen. She is Hex AF. And to me, this is probably the smartest fight. The game creators was thinking way too hard on this fight. This is the smartest fight I've ever fought in any game. Let me explain why. So you have the first form, right? The first form of Yunalesca, her counter attack is to put a status ailment on you. If you hit her, she put on blindness. If you use magic, she puts on silence. Now, you're constantly taking status ailments off, and you're constantly doing it. You've been doing it throughout the entire game. And now you're doing it even more in this fight because that's our counterattack. So in her second form, she puts you on zombie. Now, your first reaction, because you were just taking status ailments off constantly, is to take that off as soon as you get it on you. Then when she goes to her third form, which you're going to make sure that everything's off for you before you go to her third form because you don't know what to expect, you get hit with mega death. And it takes dying about 4 or 5, maybe 8 times before you realize what the actual is going on. It's it's that serious. Like, you're gonna die when you first play this boss maybe 10 times trying to figure out how to get past mega death, because it doesn't make any sense. She's just killing everybody at the same time, and a lot of times you figure it out by either looking it up on Google or by making a mistake and having zombie on when she does it. Usually that's how you figure it out, and you're like, oh. And when you think about it, it makes so much sense. But it was way too genius how they did this for you to, to be ahead of the game. They was thinking way too hard. So not surprised that this is number 1. And not just that, she also had Mind Blast, and she has 3 forms. And the story around this was great. Titus was pissed off because his girl was about to die. Orin came back for revenge. We was getting rid of Yevon's old teachings and replacing them with new stuff. We decided we wasn't going to let Yuna die with the final Aeon, and we just going to go kill Sin ourselves. And it's in Zanarkand. So the story, of course, it has to be a perfect score all the way through. And as far as the difficulty goes, I just covered fight and difficulty in the first part. The fight was amazing because it was so horrendously smart. And the difficulty is out of this world because you have to die at least 10 times in order to beat her. So anyways, guys, that's it. That is the top 5 bosses of Final Fantasy X. Kingpin Games out. Bye.
I know that you're hiding things, using gentle words to shelter me. Your words were like a dream, but dreams could never